Alright, so welcome back. Hopefully you found the first video helpful. And in this video we're going to look at solving some level 0 type of problems. So let's just go ahead and get started. I have 6 examples here that we'll work through. Shouldn't take too long, we'll just work through them. Let's start with number 1. We have x squared, so we have x squared is equal to 4. So what this problem is saying is you want something squared, something times something is 4. So it might be really easy for you to see that the answer is going to be 2, or at least I should say one of the answers is 2. So like if you think about this, 2 squared, 2 times 2 is 4. And if we go back to the previous video, what we did in the previous video, we can see that something squared is in fact 4, right? So 2 squared is 4. So that's kind of the idea behind these types of problems, is that you're trying to figure out a number that when you multiply by itself, it gives you that number. And what we're really doing is just taking the square root. So I'm not really essentially writing this out, but I'm really just taking the square root of both sides. And we know that the square root of 4 is simply just 2. But that's not the only answer. We can have another solution. For example, x equals negative 2 is also an answer, because negative 2 times negative 2. So if you just think about this really quick, negative 2 squared means negative 2 times negative 2, and that is also 4. So here in this example, we have this answer, and we also have this answer. So let's move forward to another one. Let's jump over to 5. Let's skip around and let's just do number 5. So for problem 5, we have z squared is equal to 25. So let's see how this works. So that means that something squared is equal to 25. So something times something is 25. So what's the square root of 25? Well, that's just 5. And it makes sense because 5 times 5 is 25, so there's one answer. Or we can say that z is also equal to negative 5. Again, negative 5 squared is also 25. So those two answers will satisfy that problem. Let's jump to number 2. So let's go to number 2. So we have w squared. So we have w squared is equal to 24. Alright, so again, we're looking for something. That's a weird looking w. Let me do it again. So we have w is equal to something. Well, how do we get 25? If we go back to problem 5, how do we get from the 25 to the 5? Well, we took the square root, and the square root of 25 was 5. If we go back to problem number 1, how do we get from 4 to 2? Well, we took the square root to get 2. So here, what do? Well, we don't know what the square root of 24 is, but we can definitely say that it's going to be positive square root of 24, and the other answer is going to be negative square root of 24, right? So we know that we're going to have two answers, a positive and a negative one. Now, the next thing to remember is, well, can you simplify the square root of 24? And we did that in the previous video. In the previous video, we saw, for example, the square root of 20, problem number 2 here. The square root of 20 was not perfect square, but we went ahead and broke it up with 4 times 5, and we found the square root of 4. We can do the same thing here. If you think about 24 is really, I can break this up. So let me see, let me erase this really quick. Let me just focus on the positive one for now. So w is equal to positive, let's see, square root of 24 can be broken up as 4 times 6, right? And we can definitely break up the 4 and the 6 as the square root of 4 and the square root of 6. And what's the square root of 4? Well, the square root of 4 is just 2, and the square root of 6 we don't know, so we just leave it like that. We can't break that down anymore. So it turns out that the 24, when we take the square root of it, we can simplify it so that it's that. Now, just all you have to do is just say, well, w also equals negative 2 square root of 6. Now, instead of writing w equals negative 2 square root of 6 again, we can simply just put a plus and a minus there to indicate that we're talking about both solutions, the positive and the negative one. So for this problem, let me go ahead and get pink out. This right here is our solution. We have the positive and we also have the negative. For example, for number 1, I could have said x is equal to plus or minus 2. For example 5, I could have said that z is equal to positive and negative 5, or positive or negative 5. So let's again continue to move around. Let's jump to number 4. Let's look at number 4. Let me just scroll down to give myself some space here. Alright, so we have x squared is equal to 18. So something times something is 18. Again, 18 is not a perfect square, but we know that the answer is going to be plus or minus the square root of 18. Now, can we break this down? So 18. So what is 18? Well, 18 is simply just 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. Aha, look. 9 right here falls into our list of perfect squares. 9 is a perfect square. So I can break up 18 into 2 times 9, or 9 times 2. And I can say that x is equal to plus minus the square root of 9 times 2. Then I can break that up again using the techniques that I learned in the previous video as the square root of 9 times the square root of 2. And what is the square root of 9? We know that that is just a 3, so we get plus minus 3 square root of 2. And that's our answer there. So let me just go ahead and take out another color, put a box around it. And again, you could say x is equal to 3 square root of 2 or x equals negative 3 square root of 2 if you want to write it the way we wrote this one up here. But I'm just going to write plus and minus and take care of it like that. Alright, so we're almost done with these problems. Let's jump over to 3 and then we'll work out 6. Alright, so problem 3. We have y squared is equal to 10. Now, hopefully you recognize that 10 is not a perfect square by now. There's no number times itself that'll give us 10, at least no integer that we can say. So we're going to say y is equal to plus minus the square root of 10. Now let's think about 10. Can we break 10 down? Well, what times what is 10? Well, 10 is really just 1 times 10, or 2 times 5. Now, are any of these numbers perfect squares? Other than 1, because 1 doesn't really help us out. But the 2 and the 5 don't help us out either. So it turns out that we're done. We can't break 10 down, so we leave it like that. So y is equal to just plus or minus the square root of 10. Let's look at our last problem. P squared is equal to 15. That tells me that P must be plus or minus the square root of 15. Now let's think about breaking down 15. Can you break down to 15? Well, if you make a simple factor tree chart, or whatever you want to call this, we have 1 times 15 or 3 times 5. Notice 3, 5 don't help us out. The 1 doesn't help us out, and the 15 doesn't help us out. So we can't break this down. And when we can't break it down, we'll just put a box and say that's our answer. That's pretty much all there is to solving these types of problems here, level 0 type of problems. Go ahead and practice some of these on your own on the worksheet that I gave you. And if you're having trouble, keep grinding through it. And if you're stuck on simplifying square roots, make sure that you go back to video 1 and rewatch that so that you can go ahead and practice those as well. You need to master simplifying square roots before you can move on to level 0. In the next video, we'll look at level 1 type problems. Stay tuned.